Well, hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us on Logistics Executive TV. And today I am joined by a very special gentleman who I first met about 25 years ago. He is a specialist in a number of areas, but one of the most experienced aviation, express, cargo, air freight specialists around the world. And he has held senior positions with organisations such as FedEx, most recently in Australia, TNT in the US, DHL throughout the US, and in the Middle East, where I must say he was my very first customer here, our customer for the recruitment side of our business way back in the day. And it's my great pleasure to introduce Mr. Matt Daniels from Sydney, Australia. Matt, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks, Kim, and very, very nice words indeed. I'll try to live up to those expectations.
No, great, Matt. And of course, we haven't spoken to each other for some time, but I've been trolling you on LinkedIn, and you are now a consultant to a range of tier one organisations around the world because of your geo background and many different continents. So it's really good to have you on. Your beginning of your career when I met you was in the area of HR. You've gone right the way through operations in the aviation sector, and then now across more latterly in the commercial sector in Australia.
Yeah, that's right. So HR, although some people call that high risk. And then more into the general management and recently sales. So I've had the opportunity to zigzag through most organisations within my career. So I've been quite fortunate from that perspective.
Brilliant. And I think our sort of careers just didn't quite overlap when I was a senior executive with TNT Ansett Air Cargo in New Zealand back in the 80s and 90s, and you were in another part of the world completely. So, Matt, I want to talk to you today specifically about the commercial side of the aviation industry. Massive dynamics, of course, pre-COVID, during COVID, and then since then we've seen a number of cycles in the aviation, air freight, express in particular, which is a little bit of your forte, and all about margins. So maybe you can talk to us a little bit about the work that you've been doing on margins and inputs and experience that you could share with our audience.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I mean, for me, I'm quite passionate about margin improvement. It really can make the difference between a great organisation and one that doesn't last more than a year. Internationally, when you look at the three big carriers, UPS, FedEx, and DHL, the express margins there can bounce up and down, but typically they are fairly good margins, and a lot of that is because they're at it's a very asset heavy industry, and the barriers to entry because of those assets are quite prohibitive, and so therefore you're kind of protecting that. But when you get into the air cargo, where it's not so asset heavy, or within, for example, the domestic transportation industry here in Australia, the margins are very, very skinny, and that's because, again, the barriers to entry are wide open, right? You just need to be able to set yourself up and off you go. And I think if you look at margins, a lot of people look at the profit at the end of the month, and really what they need to do is, okay, that's great too. Yep, I mean, it's something important, obviously, but if you focus on the drivers, the numbers will take care of themselves. So for me, margin improvement needs to be a deliberate strategy, and it needs to be endorsed across all functions of the organisation. It can't be just an annual price increase. Yeah.
Okay. So I recall, back in the day, late 80s, when I was GM for TNT, as I said, for Ansett Air Cargo and air freight, also on the ground courier and international as well. Small country, so you cover all of those areas. So I was on ramp there, and we had our own fleet of aircraft back in those days as well. Pretty much my sales team, which was probably about 15 or 20 people in all, just for Central New Zealand. It's pretty much things were sold off the rate card. So here's our costs. You'd have your Monday morning meeting. Here's the costs. This is what our carrier costs are. This is what's costing for the aircraft, for the road pickup and delivery, PU&D, and then what capacity we had, how many cubic meters we could have on a particular passenger or a cargo aircraft, which we had several of. And then there's your margin on top, and you've just got to go and sell that. Had things stayed the same, or have they changed dramatically since those days, Matt?
Yeah, I think they have, and if we're still living in the past and saying it's just a cost plus, and this is what I think the margin is, rather than saying I know the margin. If you're moving 1 million shipments a day, for example, or 15 or 20 million, and you can improve that margin by 1 or 2 cents per shipment, even, it's a significant impact. And so I think when we talk about margin improvement, we look at the financial stability of the organization, because it allows you to reinvest. And if you can't reinvest, you can't improve your service levels, you can't manage your business properly. And so having a model that reflects all of so every activity comes with a cost, right? Whether it's fixed, whether it's variable, whether it's both. And if you're not capturing those, then you are really exposing the business to risk. And if I talk about risk, over the last 2 years, several large companies in Australia have gone out of business. Scott's Refrigerated Logistics, which was the largest transportation company there that was refrigerated. They went out. XL Express, they were a 35-year-old business. They finished up with about 42 million in debt. And then, more recently, Don Watson Transport, that was 77 years in operations. And if you check out the numbers, you might be surprised to see that 1 in 12 Australian transportation businesses closed in the past year. And according to the ABS, the Australian Bureau of Statistics, that's a 40% year-over-year increase. Now, when we talk about that number, okay, it could well be some of these are smaller organisations, but there are a few that I gave examples of that are more than 200, 300, 500 employee businesses. So the reason for a lot of these closures are things like poor strategic decisions, cost flow, financial controls, but poor economic conditions is down the list. And where I'm going with that is that we have control over the business even when the economy is underperforming. And all of the companies have the same set of challenges, whether it's rising costs, whether it's labour shortages, whether it's regulatory pressures, whatever it might be. We're all in the same boat, and we can all manage the business the same way. It's just the ones who tend to manage the business from a margin improvement perspective will do better. Just for example, for many years, the thought was, well, I'll just put more on the truck. I'll just put more in the warehouse. And I'll sweat those assets, and that's going to make me profitable. But the rates were not rising with the costs. The prices weren't rising with the costs. They were just taking on more volume. Now, what you'll see now is there's been a change of thought. That view now is focusing more on cost drivers and profitability opportunities. But really, the question is, does your organization have a comprehensive cost matrix that captures areas such as shipment profile, origin and destinations, distance, weight, transit time, cubic capture? Do you understand your customer base? Do you have really big customers that are not so profitable, and a very small SME base, which are cute and cuddly and very profitable? Is your top 5 customers 80% of your business? I mean, you need to really understand that, and you need to look at what that means at customer level, particularly for those large.
Okay, so we've got a lot of our audience, of our 400,000 or so followers on LinkedIn, on our various platforms, are freight forwarders. A lot of people are in the aviation sector. We have a lot that are not, that are in all sorts of other logistics and supply chain sectors, of course. But of those who are freight forwarders, of course, they don't have the same costs to consider or investment profiles, as you say, asset heavy profiles as a carrier, as an organisation which owns the airframes or leases the airframes, big organisations, as you say, so the likes of TNT and FedEx and UPS and DHL and others. So there's the asset heavy and the carrier platforms, and then there are the freight forwarders. So, and of course, the asset heavy characters globally, these big tier one organisations, which you and I have both worked for over the years, have a whole range of ancillary costs that stretch into the future that need to be taken care of in that margin as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. And you know, to actually be successful, really, this is a business 101. You have to be agile, right? If you're an agile organization that can flex up and down, that can manage your resources. We look at Uber, for example, dynamic pricing. And if you just look outside, the hotel industry uses dynamic pricing. So do airlines. You know, you pick a seat, you pay more for the ticket. You know, you want more bags, and so. Yep. So what you have to do is you have to follow the shipment cycle from soup to nuts, so to speak, and say, right, what are all the activities within there, and how does that impact my cost, and what can I do about it to recover that cost? Because a lot of it is just not saying I want to grow my margin. It could be margin recovery, it could be cost recovery in some cases. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to make sure that whatever you offer in your product portfolio doesn't mean that you have to lose your shirt, right? Because that's well, that's it. So talk to me just quickly about the risks of adopting this margin improvement strategy focus that you're talking about. What are a couple of the risks that an organization has to look out for if it's going to go down this route? Yeah. So look, if you don't have a cost platform, if you don't understand what your costs are by activity, then that's the biggest risk that you can have, because you really need to start somewhere. You talked about before having a pricing schedule or a tariff. How do you know whether that tariff, which has probably been in place for 10 years, how do you know that's still turning a profit? How do you know that the margins, even on that, are any good? And so really every 2 to 3 years, you should actually go back and revisit your model that you should be able to develop, and then that will tell you, based on the activities by customer for those large customers, whether or not the margin is there, or whether you need to go back and actually do something about it. So, you know, if I take, for example, the retail sector, which is a big customer right across the transportation industry, and warehousing. If you deliver to a shopping centre, it's going to cost you more, because you're actually moving cartons, pieces of freight, right, rather than one pallet that's consolidated to a warehouse somewhere. If you're delivering heavyweight business to consumer, B2C, and it's a 100-kilo gym set up 5 flights of steps, it's going to cost you more than a 2-kilo package. And so does your model reflect that? And so when you're developing pricing for some of these larger customers, you really need to lean on that model and make sure that you are pricing that correctly, because it is very, very easy to just say the market rate from Sydney to Melbourne is 23 cents a kilo, and that's what I'm just going to do on the truck, and off we go. Thanks very much. But where are you picking up from? Where are you delivering to? Does it need to be stored? Is it ugly freight? Is it incompatible? How many pieces per airway bill? Because if you've got 20 pieces on an airway bill, trying to keep them, if they're not consolidated, it all costs money, Kim. And so if you don't have the model, then you won't be able to make the right level of adjustments that you need to. Yeah.
Okay. So what would a quick snapshot from you, given that the later part of your career to date has been heavily involved in the commercial side of it, on the back of all the operational and HR side of business, for a salesperson or sales unit going to a customer looking to do an uprate, what would be a couple of the things that you believe would be best pointed out to the client to try and get an uprate at a time when capacity is high currently. Let's face it, capacity is up there, margins are down globally for a range of reasons, and we'll cover that in another conversation down track. What would be 1 or 2 points for sales teams to keep in mind to be able to sell in to the client?
Yeah. Information's power. You hear it all the time, and it is true. If you're sitting down and having a fact-based conversation with a customer, it makes it so much easier than if you're just saying, I need another 20% from you or 5% from you or whatever it might be. And the customers, by the way, they're very good at negotiating too. And often we find ourselves with larger customers in situations where there's a negative margin driven by the fact that that customer has been able to negotiate no increase for 5 years or 10 years. And so the salesperson needs to go in there armed with all that information. They need to be able to be confident, because we're talking about executing a plan here. And I think the secret sauce is in that execution, right? Because it's one thing to develop a model. It's another thing to say, right, against the current pricing and tariffs that I have, I need to make adjustments. And against these group of customers that are zero or negative margin, I need to go in there and I need to sell in the fact that we're still the person for them. We're still the company that they need to be with, but we need to be able to come to an agreement so that it's a win-win situation, right? So they're not negative. And you've got to do both. You've got to change the model that you have in terms of your tariffs, and then you've also got to make sure that you're addressing the customers that are negative margin in or low margin, and they will particularly be your larger customers. So sure. if you don't support the sales team with the right level of information, the right incentive structure surrounding that, then it's not going to come to fruition, because you need to make sure that you are supporting them. A lot of companies at this point, Kim, get very nervous, and it's the confidence of having the model, having that information, and having a strategy and a tactic to be able to go out to these customers that will make the difference. A lot of customers don't move forward. Companies don't move forward with executing the increase because they're worried about the revenue loss that they'll get. But actually, if you're able to flex, your resources, etc., you may find that if you lose that revenue, you'll become more profitable, because what you were doing for that individual customer was just a train wreck for the business.
Yeah, you're actually triggering me, mate. So to 30 years ago plus, in terms of we would go out when we first started with Ansett New Zealand, competing with Air New Zealand, with Ansett TNT, and we had to go in there at low rates to get revenue, to actually pay some bills, to build a business, to build an air cargo, air freight airline. And then as we got the revenue, and we would gradually improve the rates and lose some of the bigger loss-making customers, even though they were valuable at the time.
You have to do. Yeah, I mean, that's actually the approach, but it has to be right across the organization, embedded in the strategy. It has to be a discussion that you're having all the time. And as I said, not just that once off, here's your increase for the year, here's your 3% or your 2.5, or Mr. Customer, you've been good to us, here's your 0.5, and yet your costs are going up by 5%. And you'd have to think in the back of your mind, at what point do I really make the rubber hit the road and start having those discussions? And it all starts with the facts. And if you have that model, Kim, and you know what your costs are, then you're much more likely to be successful than if you just have a guess. Even though you might have 20, 30, 50 years in the business, and you think, I know what I'm doing, and I can manage this, and these costs we changed. Everything's changed, right?
Yeah, ringing so true, bringing back so many memories. Hey, Matt Daniels, air freight, sales, commercial guru, so many sage words, very experienced head. Really appreciate you joining us on the show. I know you're about to head off on some holidays up on the coast, and look forward to speaking with you again in 2026. But in the meantime, if people want to get hold of you, they can see upstairs, they can see your contact on LinkedIn. They've got your email address there. So anybody who's looking at any input on, especially on the sales and commercial side, on margins, whether it be air, road, probably not so much sea for you, Matt, but people are welcome to call you, yeah?
That's right. And thanks, Kim, for the opportunity, and of course, thanks to the listeners for their time as well. I hope there's at least one or two things that they've been able to capture.
Brilliant, Matt. You haven't changed a bit since 25 years ago, so obviously the weather is good to you down there. Good stuff. And thanks, everybody, for joining us on Logistics Executive TV.
All right. Thank you. Thanks, Kim.